Thank you. Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board. Welcome also to the officers present and to members of the public in the room, and also to anybody joining us online. So before we begin the meeting, I will first ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out the housekeeping notices. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point at the War Memorial at the front of the building. And finally, please could everyone ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on laptops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So moving to agenda item 1, that is apologies. I don't believe we have had any apologies for this meeting. So that's fine. And agenda item 2 is substitute members, and therefore, if we have, we don't believe we have any substitute members either for the meeting. Moving on then to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Can I ask whether any members of the board have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests on any items on the agenda? I'm not seeing anyone indicating. Okay. I will just at this moment, in the interests of full transparency, declare that I have an interest in relation to send funding, just simply because my family, I have a family member in receipt of an EHCP. I don't believe that that does preclude me from discussing anything in relation to that, but I do want that to be so that there is transparency, that people are aware. Councillor Macro.
I think I will have to give my interest in that, as you've said yourself. So.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Moving on then to item 4, which is the confirmation of minutes. So there are a few small amendments to the minutes, which I'm just going to take you through before asking for approval. Clause 17 should read at the end of it, in agenda item 9, leisure services presentation. So this is on the end of the paragraph. In agenda item 9, leisure services presentation, as they were a representative on sport pool and as an operator of a non-profit club using leisure facilities. Clause 22, the opening paragraph should read at the end, the potential operator had withdrawn. So those words are missing from the end of the opening paragraph. And clause 23, the final paragraph of this section on page 12, the slight amendment should read, both BCP council members present who are on the BDC board. So with those amendments, could I ask if the board agrees that those minutes are a correct record? Consensus for that? Any dissent? Okay, thank you. So moving on then to our item. Before we move on, I have just an update on the actions and recommendations from the last meeting. So there were 3 areas where we gave recommendations to Cabinet following our last meeting. One on the Bournemouth Air Festival. This board supported option 4 as outlined in the report, and that was accepted by Cabinet. The Winter Gardens project, we supported the recommendations in the report, which was accepted. We also added that we would welcome the development of the town centre vision for Bournemouth and requested to scrutinise the regeneration visions for the 3 towns in the BCP area as these are redeveloped, and a response from Cabinet will be provided to that by the 18th of August. And finally, and similarly, we recommended that Cabinet be urged to put in place, this was on the leisure services paper, an access to leisure scheme across the whole BCP area as soon as possible, recognising that people in Poole have lost this facility and with particular emphasis on ensuring accessibility for people with disabilities. And again, a response from Cabinet is to be provided to that by the 18th of August. So that's just some brief updates on the outcomes from the last meeting. Moving on now then to the agenda item 5, which is the work plan. And so, work plan. So we have some updates. Mainly, let me just check. Do we have beyond what's here?
There's no further updates. These are the only 2 other things to mention.
Yeah. So this one. So the updates to mention are that firstly around the working group on the public consultations framework development. So this working group is listed at the moment as completed in our work plan, but the findings haven't yet been reported back to the board. What I'm going to propose now is that the working group be reopened. We've had some discussions around revisiting or extending the work of that group to take into account a couple of recent public consultation exercises as sort of case studies to look at really recent examples of how consultation is working and any areas where we might need to do some further thinking. So, for example, the community governance review and the car parking consultation that's currently open. The idea being these will give us a good evidence base to consider and to possibly strengthen the recommendations of the working group, and in turn strengthen the framework that's in development. So I don't want tonight to open up really for comments or debate on those particular consultations, but if members have any views that they want to share with the working group to take account of those particular examples, then perhaps could they email them to Sue, to Councillor Aikenhead, who is the chair of that working group. If the board's in agreement with this approach, we'll continue the work of that the working group over the summer and timetable the findings of the group to report back to the board at a suitable point after that. Does anyone have any comments on that? No. Good. Okay. There's another bit of an update for our work plan on the local plan, just to note that it's been agreed that this board will be the lead scrutiny body for the new local plan. And finally, to note that we have a briefing session booked in on the 8th of September, and that's been agreed that we'll cover the CRM system at that session, and that all councillors will be invited. Were there any questions or comments on those issues? No? Okay. And then we will move on to, unless anyone had any other issues they wanted to raise on the work plan that I haven't covered, sorry, I should just check. No. Okay. Moving on then to item 6, which is public issues. I believe we have one public statement that has been received in relation to agenda item 7, pay and reward. And I think we have Rich Sullivan with us, and I'd like to invite him now to come and to present the statement to the board. Yeah, if you come and sit and use that microphone in front of you. Thank you.
That's worked. Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Rich Sullivan. I'm one of the team managers within Children's Services. And I'm submitting this statement on behalf of the collective and as a representation of the other team managers, IROs and assistant team managers. The pay and reward process is causing significant concern amongst children's social care staff. The process has been unclear and misleading, initially suggesting flexibility in pay based on experience, only to later enforce a uniform pay. This has left experienced managers, ATMs, IROs and social workers feeling undervalued, facing pay cuts up to £6,000 due to significant reduction in LMS and lack of recognition. These changes threaten staff morale, recruitment and retention, ultimately impacting the quality of care for vulnerable children and families. The team urges Cabinet to recall the 2020-2021 staffing crisis that led to an inadequate Ofsted rating. We are now good and want to stay that way. But to do so, we must retain experienced staff through fair and competitive compensation. The Council must not rely solely on goodwill without offering reciprocal support. We call for current pay to be maintained to reflect experience and tenure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan, for that. Would you mind just turning the microphone off? Apologies. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so then we're moving on, I think, to item 7 on the agenda, and that is the enhancements to the pay and reward offer. So this is a report that is going to be introduced, I think, by Councillor Hannah, who is the portfolio holder for Transformation, Resources and Governance. After Councillor Hannah has spoken, I will invite representatives of the 2 trade unions, GMB and Unison, to address the board as well. And also for this item, we have Sarah Dean, the Director of People and Culture, and Liz Bowman, the Pay and Reward Programme Manager. So thank you all for being here, and I'll hand over to Councillor Hannah to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you will indulge me because there's quite a bit to cover in the introduction. May I start with a reminder of the journey we've been on? BCP was formed in 2019, 6 years ago. It merged 3 councils and part of a 4th, so that our employees had 4 different sets of job descriptions and pay structures, with the need to create a new single set of these. Because we value our staff and want a fair pay structure for all, because we want to ensure that BCP is competitive in the employment market and avoid the reliance on more costly agency staff in some of our critical roles, and because we need to minimise the risk of equal pay claims and the financial consequences of these. 6 years later, we still need to achieve all of these goals. It has been a massive undertaking, reviewing all of the various posts held by our 5,000 employees, using job evaluation measures to compare them, and negotiating and creating a new single set of terms and conditions and colleague benefits, and then working with our unions to seek to at least majority acceptance from each of them, following both good practice and legislative requirements. The process having slowed under the previous administration, we began moving forward again in 2023 and reached the stage of agreement with the unions to ballot on the then offer in January 2024. By the end of 2024, we had had 3 unsuccessful ballots, still not having achieved an offer that was acceptable to both sets of union members. Officers continued to meet with union representatives, seeking to identify more closely the issues that were of concern to the members, and have held workplace meetings with groups of employees for the same purpose. Based on those discussions, officers have prepared an enhanced offer which was put to union representatives, who agreed to undertake a further ballot of their members. The enhanced offer requires an additional revenue commitment, which requires approval by full council. It was felt more appropriate to test the water through the union ballot system before bringing it to council, since rejection of this enhanced offer by the union membership was still possible. It was made clear to our union representatives and to our staff that even with a positive outcome of the ballots, it was contingent on council approval. It was also made clear that if the offer was rejected, the council might need to revert to the previous offer if the financial investment was not approved. This was set out to all members of the Council in a letter from the Chief Executive by email on the 7th of May, prior to the commencement of the respective ballots. His email explained that staff had shared their main concerns as being fewer colleagues receiving a decrease in pay, more scope to progress within their pay band, better pay protection arrangements for colleagues losing salary, improved rates for call-outs and bank holiday working, and salary supplements being taken into account for all allowances. On that basis, the Chief Executive's letter explained that the enhanced offer was prepared to include a further reduction in those colleagues who will see a decrease in pay, widened pay bands 1 to 10 to allow more colleagues to move up within their pay band, a guaranteed 18-month pay protection period starting from the first day of implementation of the new salary structure, increased call-out rates from plain time to time and a half, hourly rate for additional allowances to include any salary supplements, and enhanced rates for bank holiday working to double time and a day off in lieu. Critically, the Chief Executive explained, and I quote, "It is important for elected members to note that this proposal would require an additional 1.9 million investment in our proposed pay structure, taking the Council's total commitment for pay and reward to 4.6 million a year. That figure of 1.9 million has since been revised downwards to 1.752 million, but all councillors were fully aware at that time of the financial commitment that the enhanced offer would entail. I hope that it is not an unreasonable assumption on my part that all councillors, having been informed of this, with no expressions of concern having been received at the time, that councillors were therefore content that this enhanced offer should be put to union members for ballot, which has now taken place, with both unions having by majority vote agreed to accept the offer as we hoped. Without preempting discussion here, I want to express real appreciation to the Director and her team for all the work that underpins the offer and for bringing us to the point that we have agreement from our unions, which contrasts with the experience of other councils, including Derby City Council, Leicester City Council, Coventry City Council, and not least Birmingham City Council, which have all failed to reach this point and which have had to resort to dismissal and re-engagement, with all the concerns and demotivation generated amongst staff, the risks of industrial action or the reality, and the risks of equal pay claims not having been adequately mitigated. That is not to claim that Cabinet and full Council agreeing to the recommendations is without risk of any kind, and the report sets out the nature of the potential risks. But the tangible benefits of moving forward on the basis of the recommendations are set out in paragraph 6. The enhanced offer significantly reduces the risk of potentially costly equal pay claims that in other councils have led to severe financial issues and significant cuts in services. It mitigates the risk of industrial action that in other councils have created extensive disruption across communities. It achieves equity and fairness in pay and terms and conditions for all colleagues. It removes differences in pay for colleagues in the same or similar roles. It introduces a total reward offer that makes us competitive in the recruitment marketplace and reduces our ongoing reliance on agency workers and recruitment and retention payments. It provides greater stability and structure for services around our non-standard working arrangements, and it removes the ongoing uncertainty that our colleagues have faced for the past 6 years to allow us to rebuild colleague morale and employee engagement levels. The financial cost of the enhanced offer is as set out in the table in the report, figure 1. This sets out the basis of the calculation that leads to the additional 1.752 revenue commitment. Officers have already worked to establish savings in the current budget to provide for this, as are set out in Appendix 1. As is covered in the paragraphs following figure 1, there is increased exposure to annual incremental drift. The budget pressure caused as employees move up the pay scales. This is normally managed by services within their budgets, but it remains to be seen what further pressures this creates. It is also the case that the application of the enhanced offer still leaves concerns for some colleagues. And you have heard earlier from colleagues in Children's Services about the issues arising because of the reduction in their recruitment and retention payments caused by the increased widening of the pay band. We want to assure these colleagues that the Council takes these concerns seriously and is looking at how it can address the issues they have raised. Discussions are ongoing and we are unable to share details at this point, but officers are actively engaged in finding solutions. In respect of the overall offer, the report explores what our other options are as to whether to accept the recommendation or go down some other route, and provides the background information to support the recommendations as they stand. Appendix 2 sets out the alternative pay options which have been considered. Appendix 3 provides details of the enhanced offer. Appendix 4 is the new pay and grading booklet. Appendix 5 describes the new terms and conditions and colleague benefits. Appendix 6 summarises the legal implications, which are exempt. And Appendix 7 provides the anticipated timeline for implementation for the offer, should full council give it its support. The effect of not agreeing the recommendations needs to be clear, with 4 inevitable consequences, all of which I believe we would wish to avoid. First, it would leave us open to equal pay claims at an unknown cost to the council. Secondly, it would mean that to introduce a fair pay structure across the council, we would have no other route than dismissal and re-engagement, which, as paragraph 21C explains, because of the recent Employment Rights Bill 2024, potentially leaves us open to yet further risks by way of multiple claims of unfair dismissal. Thirdly, we would almost certainly face industrial action. The extent of this is impossible to predict, but we have seen the effects in other councils, and having achieved agreement with our unions here in BCP, the withdrawal of the offer at this stage would inevitably receive a robust response. Finally, and far from the least of these concerns, we would demoralise our staff, who would feel undervalued and let down. They have done a marvellous job over these past 6 years in welding together the 3 and a fraction councils that were merged, in managing the financial pressures that we have had to deal with in that time, in generating real savings through our transformation programme that have helped to mitigate these financial pressures and that exceed the costs of implementing this offer, the whole offer, not just the enhanced elements being discussed today. This administration values our workforce. We do not want to take them down the uncertain and worrying route of dismissal and re-engagement. We do not want our residents to face industrial action of any kind. Because we value them, we want for our staff the fair pay structure we have been promising for years. Now, at long last, we can deliver that. That said, I'll leave it with the board to explore further any and all of what is covered in the report and in my remarks, and I'm grateful to our officers who stand by ready for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hannah. I would now like to invite, we have Andy Jeeves from GMB and John Hartley from Unison, I think, are here, and I'd like to invite them to come and address the board as well. Are you going to come up together and sit together, or you take it one in turn? You're a bit short of seats. Sorry. Well, thank you, Councillor Hannah. I don't know who's going to speak first, but if, when you start, if you just introduce yourself for the meeting, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Andy Jeeves. I'm the GMB convener for BCP. I have a short statement in front of me. Thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting today. I shall proceed. Following a ballot of our members, the proposed offer was accepted, and GMB have communicated this outcome to the relevant officers. We now look forward to the council to progress the implementation of the agreed measures in line with the commitments made during the consultation process. We trust that the Overview and Scrutiny Board will give due regard to the views and interests of the workforce throughout its deliberations, and the GMB will continue to monitor developments closely on behalf of our members. Should the Board require any further clarification from GMB, we remain available to support the process and to contribute constructively when appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And John, would you like to say some words as well?
John Hartley, Unison BCP branch secretary. So, in our third ballot, Unison members decided to vote to accept the latest proposal on pay and reward. 83% voted to accept, while 17% voted to reject. The turnout was 64%. We have a democratic mandate from our members to accept the latest proposal. Our members voted in good faith on the understanding councillors will support the proposal. There's a lot of work to do before the implementation date, including exploring options to mitigate the effects of the change to a new pay scheme on staff adversely affected, alongside ensuring the council develops a fair and equitable scheme, which was one of our main objectives. We would also be able to move forward with a collective agreement based on the latest proposal. If it is not agreed, we can't at this point predict what action our members could take, but there is no basis for reaching a collective agreement on any other option or proposal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hartley. Okay, so thank you to those who've spoken on the item already. I will now open up the to members of the board for discussion and debate. Before I do, I just want to note that there is one, as was mentioned by Councillor Hannah, there is one non-public appendix to this item regarding legal implications. So just if I can suggest, just so that you're clear, if any issues arise on that particular part of the report, we may need to move into a non-public session, and this would need to be proposed and agreed by the meeting. I'd suggest, therefore, any questions on this aspect maybe are left to the end of the discussion, if there are any at all, to enable us to continue in public meeting for the time being. Okay. So if I can, if anyone would like to start with any questions they might have or any comments on what we've heard so far. Councillor Dedman.
Yes, can I thank Councillor Hannah for an extremely detailed run through it all, especially talking about the long journey that we've been on, and some of us have been on that long journey since the beginning, and we never thought it would take that long. The one thing that I would like to raise, I think it's all been sorted. First of all, I have never thought that when we entered this venture to all join together, that any of our staff members who'd stayed with us, because a lot of them went, as we know, would be disadvantaged by what we did. And I'm very sorry that that has happened to some people, and I wish it hadn't. The other thing I want to mention, and it's on, I don't know if we're going into this, I'm pretty sure this isn't confidential, but you'll have to switch me off if it is. I'd like to ask Councillor Hannah, or whoever the officer is concerned, about 57, the appeals process. has that all been sorted out up front about the job description? Because I do know certain members of the staff are concerned, as are the people that speak to them, about the job description not being adequate for the job they do. Has that all been sorted out, can I ask Councillor Hannah? I'm not going to go into names, but it's somebody that I work with.
I hope this mic will work. In terms of the first query about some people being disadvantaged, it might have been theoretically possible to put together a package whereby there would be no losers whatsoever. That would have been at a even greater cost to the council and potentially not within what we would be willing to accept financially and what could be constrained within the budget. So inevitably, there were going to be some situations where members of staff would lose because of the process. In terms of the appeals process, I would need to check with the director on the situation there.
Thank you. Good evening. Yeah, just to confirm, we've agreed the process steps with the trade unions in terms of how the appeals will operate and who will sort of form part of the panel that considers the appeals and hears the appeals. But we haven't agreed as yet the exact timing in which the window of appeals will open and colleagues will be able to submit their appeals. Obviously, it was important for us to make sure that we first had agreement, both with the ballot outcome and then through Cabinet and Council before we proceed. But we will then, once known, be confirming with colleagues about that window where individuals can submit their appeals. And then we will begin the process of actually starting to convene the appeal panels and hearing the appeals in due process. Obviously, at this stage, we don't know how many we're going to receive.
Thank you very much. Okay, I've seen Councillor Rice indicating, and then yeah, okay, Councillor Rice.
Hello. Yes, I would just like more information with regards to the public statement that we had. He mentioned, it was from Richard Sullivan, he mentioned that there were 55 managers from a very specific department. So I just wonder whether in your statement you mentioned that something was going on. I just wondered whether we could have more information and reassurance about that. It seems like quite a significant chunk of a specific department in the children's sector. I'd just like more reassurance that we're not making a mistake.
In terms of the detail, I would need to pass to the director.
Okay, is that okay, Sarah? Are you happy to?
Thank you. Yeah, so the issue is in relation to the recruitment and retention payment that the group of staff currently receives. So it's not about basic pay and base pay or the evaluated grade for that post. That's the important thing to say. But obviously appreciate that the changes that we've made through the enhanced offer has widened the pay bands, and that has impacted on the way that we calculate the recruitment and retention payment. So having brought this issue to our attention, we're looking at options that we can explore as policy change potentially to look at the way we calculate and the impact of that. We need to do it carefully and cautiously, because in order to make sure that we're mitigating any consequences of any changes that we make, we need to make sure that we're not inadvertently applying further equal pay risk into the process. And we need, most importantly, to make sure that whatever changes we make, we change to everybody that's in receipt of a recruitment and retention payment, rather than just looking at one group in isolation, because that's the way that we can mitigate any risk to the organisation. So we're in the process of reviewing options, looking at cost implications and any risks that might come with any changes that we make. I'm really mindful that I want to do that cautiously and carefully, not to sort of bring in risk, as I said. but we are doing that at pace. We recognise the concern and the anxiety that it's created. We understand the issue and how it's been caused, and we're taking every step that we can really to explore those options and make sure that we're responding appropriately.
Could I add to that, Chair, that my understanding is that any necessary changes required to mitigate the situation can be made even after pay and reward has come to full council and been determined by full council.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hannah, and I see officers nodding in agreement to that. Thank you. Councillor Rice, did you have a follow-up?
I just wanted
Point.
clarification as to whether that process would carry on depending on what we voted in full council. So that's a useful clarification. Thank you.
That's been covered. Thank you. That is very helpful and reassuring to hear. Thank you. Councillor Aikenhead, you had something you wanted to say, and then as somebody indicated, Councillor Walters. Yeah.
Yes, so first of all, I really just wanted to thank our union colleagues here for coming along to the meeting and letting us hear that you have agreed with the it's been agreed, and that's really good. And thank you to all the officers that have been involved as well, because I think that it's really important to recognise that not all councils have managed to do this, that our unions and our management together have got into a room and have made an agreement. So let's all just really recognise how important that is and what a good thing that's happened. I did have some questions about the public statement, but you have answered them all well, so that's good. I shall really, obviously, if this still remains a problem, it will probably come back to us at some stage, but it's really good that you've got that in hand. I did just want to ask one more question about the appeals process and whether that is the same as someone asking for a review of their job evaluation, or whether you have a separate process for that. So if someone feels that their job is either changed, and this will be going forward as well, either changed or something about their job is different, or they don't feel that their job has been evaluated right, do you have a process for that?
Yes, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have at the moment, and we'll continue to have, job evaluation panels that meet as part of business as usual. So, for example, we have lots of change within the organisation where teams restructure, jobs change, like you say, all the time. That's absolutely business as usual, and that panel would consider the changes to any job roles and the impact to any job evaluation. How it works is the role profiles have been job evaluated, so it's not that somebody challenges the job evaluation outcome or the salary for that role profile. It's more about whether that role profile is appropriate for the job that individual's doing, and or whether there's another role profile that might better fit the description and the work that individual does. So they're two separate processes. There's a process for appeals specifically arising out of the implementation of pay and reward. We're anticipating, based on experience, and I think I said in my report that based on experience in legacy councils, we probably will receive a large number of appeals coming forward. So we will manage that appeal process and review, as you say, whether people feel that the role profile is the right one for them, and or whether it's not, and they should be mapped to a different profile instead. And that appeals panel, which will also comprise our trade union colleagues, will consider that in the realms and advise the individuals of the outcome. So alongside that, any structural rechanges and changes to posts will be considered via a business as usual job evaluation panel.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Walters.
Thank you. So I know we've touched on the public statement already a little bit, and we talked through the risk in terms of the payment side of things. It did mention in there, obviously, that we've achieved the good Ofsted rating, which, those of us in the Children's Overview and Scrutiny have been watching amazed by the work that they've done. So I suppose rather than in terms of risk to staff, I'd like to maybe find out if we foresee any risk to the good work that we've achieved in our children's services by these changes.
Would anyone like to take that one? I can see, I'm aware Kathy's here, but not to speak to this particularly, but.
I was simply going to say that we are very much aware of the risk there, and we are extremely grateful to our children's services officers for all the work that has been done to achieve that good rating. Part of the evidence of the administration's concern about it is the fact that the portfolio holder is sitting here, and part of the reason he's here is for this item as well as for a later item. So yes, that is a matter of concern. It's not something that I personally, within my portfolio, have looked at in terms of the implication for the children themselves and for the way in which the service is delivered. That is where I would have to turn to the director on my right for further comment.
Kathy, did you want to say anything, or Councillor Burton as well? I notice your body language suggests you might want to say something. If you have to come and find somewhere to sit.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that observation as well. I do feel there is a risk here. I have been talking to children's service officers about this. I've had a number of meetings about this, and the latest one was only last week. I'm very much aware of the amount of work that was done to get the good Ofsted rating was down to the work that the officers in children's services did, and therefore I'm very aware that that work needs to be appreciated. There's a lot of work going on in the background at the moment to try to make sure that they don't suffer from this agreement. It's a complex area, and I'm being assured that we're doing a lot of work around it. But the main message I'd like to say is that we're listening to that, and we're working as hard as we can to make sure that we do get some sort of resolution to this.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. And do we have any other questions from the board at the moment? I'm going to ask a couple, if I may. Moving on to slightly different areas. Firstly, looking at the report, I just wanted a little bit more explanation on paragraph 19 and 20, which is on page 30. It says any alternative dates, this is around the implementation, I think, will significantly impact the introduction of our new payroll solution, would therefore likely mean an extended delay to implementing pay and reward. And the paragraph after that, and I'm not clear that I understand quite what's being said there. Could I just ask for you to speak to that a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this point was quite important for me to make because we can't underestimate the scale of work that would be required now to put in place the implementation arrangements. So we are, at the same time as trying to implement pay and reward, we are implementing a new payroll software. And we've had to look at the timings of that being implemented and the work that needs to go in to set up a new payroll system at the same time as the system changes that are needed in order to orchestrate the new pay and reward arrangements. So, for example, we've designed a new pay and grading structure, we've got a new set of allowances, we've got protection arrangements in place, and all of that needs to be reflected onto the system. So there's a lot of work for that team to do all the setting up at the same time as then implementing a payroll solution to go live. So the point was really just to say around the recommendation around the implementation date that we've considered all of that in the realms, and we've only really got one window in order to be able to implement pay and reward and be able to pull all of that work off at the same time and deliver it.
Okay, thank you. That does help. It's the interface between the two bits of work at the same time, and leaving you with very little room for manoeuvre. Thank you. That helps. My other question was around on page 35, paragraph 32. Again, it was just a little bit more commentary, if possible, on this element. It says much work is needed to raise levels of engagement and support colleagues through the transition period. Not questioning that that's true, just wanting to understand what that looks like a little bit more. What particularly the engagement, I think, how that looks over the coming period of time.
We're just actually out live with our latest staff engagement survey now. So that's really informative for us because it will give us a really good idea about the present situation in terms of how our colleagues are feeling. We know, it goes without saying, that this has been such a long, protracted period of time, which has been the cause of frustration for our colleagues, you know, for many different reasons, actually, for individuals. And we know that we've got work to do in kind of raising those levels of engagement with our colleagues, making them feel that they are valued. And we've heard some of the statements here today about the impact that it's had and that colleagues feel undervalued by it. And it's absolutely not the case. We've got a process to do for all the reasons that we've heard, but we know that we've got work to do in terms of making our colleagues feel that, you know, that they are valued and that we recognise the great work that they're doing in the organisation. So staff engagement survey report will give us good idea of just where we are in terms of how our colleagues are feeling. We're also mindful about the ongoing impact that the implementation process will have. Colleagues, you know, not everybody voted to accept the offer. Some colleagues will still be impacted and be feeling negative about the introduction of it. We're looking at what support we can provide to those colleagues. We're looking at, we've looked at extending our wellbeing offer. We are providing training to our managers in supporting colleagues through change. And we've already provided some training for managers in that respect as well. So it's just really thinking about what that wraparound support package needs to look like to make sure that our colleagues that have been impacted by this get the support that they need, and that overall we can raise our level of engagement across the council and make our staff feel in a better place about BCP as their employer, you know, in the longer term.
Thank you. So if I'm understanding what you're saying rightly, then the engagement survey, the outcomes from that, as you say, will give you some really useful insights. And then is there an intention to use that then to develop some sort of programme or plan to roll out? And is there a time scale in mind for that? Will it sort of run alongside the implementation of pay and reward?
Yes, absolutely. So that's what we do every year. So we do a staff engagement survey biannually, and then in the intermediary year, we have like a what we call a sort of dip test, I want to sort of call it, which is just a summary 10 questions where we will just test how engaged people are feeling at that time. And every year we review the results, we develop an action plan to look at the issues that are affecting the organisations and where we need to make changes and make improvements, but equally celebrate the things that we're doing well. It's not all doom and gloom, and that's important. And we encourage all services to work with their teams, to have follow-up discussions and workshops with their teams to explore the issues, because what's not right for one team might be different for another team. So it's important to have those individual conversations and develop their own action plans within directorates and services. So I've had my own action plan in people and culture for the last couple of years, and we proactively meet and discuss and take up action according to that plan, and continue to sort of have the conversation with colleagues around what we can do to improve or keep doing more of, because we're getting it right and we're doing well. So absolutely, yes, there'll be corporate things we can do corporately to make a change and make improvements, and there'll be a corporate action plan. We'll also work with our network groups and look at the outputs of the engagement survey from inequalities impact and what changes we might be able to make there to make improvements, as well as encourage services to develop their own plans. So lots of work really coming out of those staff engagement results.
I wonder if I just add one comment, which is that throughout that process, the single biggest issue that's been raised by all staff groups is the absence of an agreement on pay and reward and the absence of harmonised terms and conditions. That is the issue that has underlined just about every single response on the staff service that we've done in the previous years. Just worth emphasising that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Then my last questions were just I'm not sure who would be the right person to answer these. It could be Adam. There on the page 37, which gives us the where the savings are going to come from to fund the additional cost. We've got a few items I just wanted to hear a little bit more about. The main one that I wanted to ask about was this, under the operations, it's increased levels of insurance self-funding vehicles and unoccupied properties, and that's coming out at £200,000, which is reasonably significant. I just wanted to understand what that means, because I don't understand what self-funding insurance is.
I suppose what it reflects is the fact that the council's constantly looking at the insurance premiums that it pays for all things property, employees, public liability and vehicles as examples, and trying to get to that optimum balance with regards to the amount that we self-insure, i.e. cover the excess in the first instance, and the amount that we then insure from that process. We've had an independent review carried out, and that review has suggested to us we could tweak that balance slightly when it comes to vehicles, and that's what we've done. So we've just changed that balance slightly with regards to how much we self-insure and how much we then insure through the third-party insurance premium that we pay.
Okay, so that's accepting a slightly higher level of risk in some areas in terms of insurance, yes. To save some money. Yeah, okay, thank you. Now I understand. I think Councillor Walters has the question. Okay, Councillor Walters.
Thank you. I've got a question for the union reps in the room. So thank you for all the work you've done on this. You've done a great job in supporting our workforce. So the turnout was 64% for Unison and 61% for GMB. I'm not particularly au fait with these union votes and the percentages of the turnout, but is that considered a good turnout, a high turnout, or is it considered a low turnout? And for those people who didn't vote in that, what have you had any feedback for them as to why they felt they couldn't vote on this?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Inherently, the union is not just made up of people that work within the Southcote Road depots, Hatchmont Road depots. So we have a large contingent of schools. So we've still got LA schools, local government schools. We have found a difficulty with engaging in some schools. So what you'll see is the percentage of lower. So 61% is not a bad turnout from a trade union's perspective. That figure is slightly skewed because of the fact is in schools we find it very difficult to engage and get the votes from school.
But yeah, 64% in our case is a good turnout for a ballot.
Thank you. Any other councillors? I think I see Councillor Rice indicating. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's just a very small clarification. In the benefits package, are we providing? We're providing 24 access to GP. Is that a private medical facility that we're providing, I assume?
Right, it's fully qualified NHS doctors that have access to NHS records. It's through a charity which is BHSF. I've forgotten the full title of the charity, but we can certainly follow that up. But it is NHS doctors that provide the service.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else indicating to speak. We do have the recommendations to consider on the report, and to consider whether we are content with them, whether we support them, whether there's anything we'd like to suggest differently to Cabinet for tomorrow for their decision on this. This is going to Cabinet and then on to full council. So those are, you can see them on the report. To agree the additional costs associated with enhancing the proposed pay and reward offer. To agree the additional savings proposals outlined in Appendix 1. To ensure that the cost implications of the proposal remain consistent within the MTFP. Agrees the detail of the enhanced offer shown at Appendix 4 and 5. And approves the recommended implementation date of the 1st of December. So did anyone have any thoughts on those, any comments in support or not? I wonder if we just move to a vote I think I'm not hearing anyone saying that they're minded to do anything but support the recommendations. So shall we just have a show of hands on that? Could I see all those in favour of supporting the recommendations in the report?
I think it's unanimous.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you very much, Councillor Hannah. Thank you to the Unison reps and to the officers for your time bringing this really important report to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you to the board.
So, yeah. Shall we take a 5-minute comfort break at this point, just while things happen in terms of who's in the room? we're going back on now. So if everyone could be quiet, please. Don't make me get all bossy.
Then you're back live.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody, to our overview and scrutiny board. We are moving on now to item 8, which is scrutiny of budget-related cabinet reports. We have 2, but they will be taken together. So they are the financial outturn report for 2024-25 and the MTFP update at the end of quarter 1. I have, unfortunately, Councillor Cox has given his apologies as this meeting had to be moved at a later notice to accommodate the pay and reward item, and he had a conflicting meeting. So unfortunately, Councillor Cox isn't here. Adam Richards is going to present these reports to us, and I'm sure will do so with all his usual excellent skill. And Councillor Earl is also here and has offered to come forward and talk if we require someone from the administration to do so at any point. So I will therefore hand over to Adam Richards to present the papers. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Chair. And as you said, I'm going to take both reports at the same time. So I'm going to start with the MTFP update report, in the sense that what this report does is it presents an update on the 11th of June comprehensive spending review announcement. It presents the details of 2 finance-related consultations that were issued on the 20th of June, and it presents an update on the medium-term financial planning position, and it also acknowledges the actions of the leader of the council and myself as the Director of Finance in seeking government assurance that they will, as they have promised to do, return the SEND system to financial sustainability in 2025. If I start by perhaps looking at a detail of the financial outturn report, however, for 24-25, and I just start with the context and recognise that the original base revenue budget for 24-25 addressed a £30 million inherited structural deficit. It dealt with non-delivery of previous year's savings. It dealt with a cost of living crisis and increased service demand. It dealt with a revised approach to the annual repayment of debt. It was based on a 4.99% council tax increase, and it was underpinned by a savings programme of £38 million. What we achieved was actually a surplus of £1.2 million for that 24-25 financial year. So a huge and significant achievement. Matt may kick me on this remark, but I believe it is the 6th year in a row in which BCP Council has either outturned at either balanced or better. And that is a huge achievement for any local authority, let alone a new local authority. At Q3, we set ourselves the challenging target of achieving that balanced or better position when we set the budget for 25-26. Clearly, we have achieved this with a variance which represents 0.18 of 1% of the £683 million gross budget that we set for the year, and it included delivery of 86% of the budgeted savings for the financial year in question. One issue the financial outturn report does highlight, however, is in respect of the Poole Museum Capital Scheme, in that it exceeded the approved resources by 0.55 million. There was also a shortfall of about 0.8 million pounds in third-party contributions, and as a consequence, the report requests an increase in potential borrowing of 1.3 million pounds as part of a revised funding strategy. Matty Rauschep is here and is on hand if members would like to ask any questions in regards to that detailed scheme. However, if I turn back to the medium-term financial plan report, on the 11th of June, the spending review set out that local authorities' core spending power will increase by 2.6% in each of the next 3 years. It is really important to recognise that this assumption is underpinned by every upper tier local authority increasing their council tax by the maximum permitted, which will be 4.99% in each of those 3 years. So really important underlying assumption, because most of that local authority extra resources is coming from that council tax assumption. The assessment of the spending review was that it was a tough settlement in not giving the sector the funding that it requested. However, it was considered better than many other parts of the public sector. The spending review also highlighted that as part of the future funding reform consultation, they would set out further details on support to local authorities when they transition to a reformed SEND system. We then move on to the 20th of June when we received that consultation entitled the Fair Funding Review 2.0. And what the government did is on that date is they commenced an 8-week consultation for that review. They issued 46 questions, which are an appendix to the report, and they asked those questions over 126 pages. As part of the announcement, they re-emphasised that the new funding formula, which factors in issues such as population and poverty, is aimed at reallocating more resources to deprived areas, and in doing so, directing more resources to the north of the country. It includes a pledge to protect, if you like, local authorities from sudden drops in income over that 3-year transition period as a result of the new arrangements. The outcome of the consultation on an individual local authority basis is not due until release of the 26-27 provisional local government finance settlement. And as we know, historically, that is due just before Christmas. They're promising it in November. They also announced a 2-year extension to the dedicated schools grant statutory override, which allows councils to pretend on their balance sheet that the DSG deficit, which for us was £113 million on the 31st of March this year, does not exist. However, as we discussed before, the problem the council faces is in cash flowing this deficit, with the consultation referencing that government will work with local authorities to manage their SEND systems, including historic and accruing deficits. You know, the consultation gave no detail as to what that means. Therefore, and consequentially, the leader wrote to Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, and I wrote to the Director of Finance at MHCLG, requesting their support and assistance in the challenges we face, particularly in cash flowing that deficit. The second consultation was entitled Modernising and Improving the Administration of Council Tax. It focused on exploring options to improve support towards council tax and improving council tax collection and enforcement processes to deliver a fairer and more efficient system for taxpayers and councils. That consultation was for 12 weeks and was only 36 questions long. The main element of that is that we currently pay council tax over 10 months as a standard, but residents can elect to pay for it over 12. What they're proposing generally is to swap that round. The standard becomes 12, but you can pay over a short period if you so wish. And there is some other, like minor details as set out within the report. Turning back to the medium-term financial plan itself, what the report does is it recognises the funding gap for 26-27 is now £5.5 million, which is reduced from the last medium-term financial plan you had in May. That recognises the savings strategy that you've already looked at tonight with regards to pay and reward. So if council approve that, that helps that deficit come down as part of that latest position. But we have a clear risk around how the cost and demand profiles for council services potentially will change due to those macroeconomic factors, some of which are global, and more locally, the concerns around how the government agenda for the integrated care boards may impact on the council's operation and funding. Chair, that's a brief introduction to both reports, and as always, more than happy to take any detailed questions. And if they're really detailed, I've got Matt on hand to answer them.
Thank you very much, Adam. And that is very helpful introduction to the papers. So I'd like to invite members of the board to ask any questions or that they might have. I see, yeah, Councillor Trent first and then Councillor Walters.
Right, thanks. The change of formula was mentioned, and that does obviously worry me because we've always historically been regarded as a generally well-off area, and our areas of deprivation tend to get sort of ignored or marginalised. But another change I heard about today in another forum was that things like the Household Support Fund and similar grants were all going to be lumped into one category, and if the new formula is applied, it's one of those things where, you know, if you lump everything into one category, you can do all sorts of nonsense with them and reduce it. And I'm sort of wondering whether the impact of that has been thought through, because we do have residents with a high level of deprivation, and the household support fund is always fully committed. And I'm sort of wondering whether there's any danger that we might find that by lumping about 4 categories into one, that we could actually be losing out sooner than the 3 years which it looks as if it's protected for.
Thank you, Adam.
I think it's a very good question, and I think it's a real risk in the sense that I think previously in the past, we've looked at local government funding formula and we said, well, we get about £6 million in revenue support grant, i.e. the unring fence grant. Well, that's the maximum we could lose, isn't it? But if they then take all these specific grants, like the one you mentioned, lob it into the funding formula, that gives more money to come off the potential that we receive. So it is clearly a risk, and I think, you know, it's helpful feedback in forming a response to the 46 questions as part of that process. So, you know, it is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on, I think, as we go through this consultation. Clearly, we can make reference to it in our response. But alongside that, what the government have said is that there is that desire to move more of these specific grants into the local government funding formula for the unring fence grant, because what they're trying to do is stop that competition between local authorities, where we spend a lot of time and a lot of resource, you know, as individual local authorities working up bids for government grant, and they're trying to take away some of that, you know, local authorities competing against each other for scarce resources by allocating it through the actual funding formula. So I think there's a bit of pros and cons in that, and it's clearly a danger and something for us to be mindful of and to consider going forward.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Walters.
So last year, might have been last year, might have been the year before, I honestly can't remember, we voted to bring about the changes suggested by the previous government regarding when levelling up in terms of doubling council tax on second homes. We had an estimation of how much extra revenue we thought we were going to get from that. Were we accurate in that? Did we receive the same amount that we thought we were going to, or was that higher or lower than we expected?
The second homes premium applies on the 1st of April 2025. So it's in this financial year as opposed to last financial year. So that's something that as we go through this year, we'll be monitoring carefully, because we assumed a significant uplift in council tax resources as a result of implementing that premium, and watching behaviours to see if it changes, you know, the overall sum that we assumed.
So we've built that increase into these figures. is there any risk of people, suggesting that maybe their wife lives in one house and that they live in their other house, and then that way they can get around the second home side of things? If that happens, do we end up having a situation where we don't make as much money from that?
At the end of the day, it's an issue that we're watching carefully with regards to how, if you like, our residents respond, because I read the same kind of articles clearly as you do with regards to that potential risk that people might manage their tax in slightly different ways in order to avoid that second home's premium. But clearly there's a difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion, and they need to be, take good advice on anything that they potentially put in place to try and avoid that second home premium.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And was anybody else indicating? Roy, are you happy to go?
Yeah.
Councillor Beasley, and then I think Councillor Aikenhead has some questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. So my congratulations to Mr. Richards and the finance team for managing to achieve a balanced or better outturn for the past 6 years. As Mr. Richards will know, in the former Bournemouth Council, albeit on a budget of about 50% of that of BCP, we managed that for some 12 years in a row. So we're halfway there as far as BCP Council is concerned, but it's an important milestone, and it is one that's very difficult to achieve at any time, particularly those that we've been through for probably the last 20 years in local government. So well done for doing that, and I know that I should congratulate, as a matter of course, your finance team, who do a really excellent job of managing that part of the council on which everything else depends. And I say that totally sincerely because I've worked with Adam Richards and most of the team for some years, and I know the great job that they do for all of us in underpinning the finances and viability of the council. I just wanted to ask a question around the high needs budget and the SEND position, and I've listened carefully to what our interpretation is of what the government have been saying. And I would like to believe that they will deliver on what they have implied, but I suspect, like those in the finance team and many others, we will hold our breath and wait to see what actually occurs, because to grasp that nettle is proving very difficult for national politicians to go anywhere close to, whereas in the meantime, local authorities such as this have got to have a very nervous time, which in turn, of course, fetters lots of other decisions along the way. So I completely understand that. I wondered whether, in terms of the government's pledge to settle more financial resources to the north of England, whether we have any concerns about that in terms of whether it is likely to fetter or impede any resolution to the high needs budget for those authorities in the south that are under such pressure. Am I worrying unnecessarily? Do we think that there will be blanket reform across the whole country, or do we think that it may favour certain authorities in the north of England? Because that really would have severe implications for us. Any delay at this very late stage could be something from which we can't recover, as we all know. That's the first one. The second one is in terms of the DSG override and the accumulated deficit and the projections looking forward on that. We've just listened for an update on the horror story of where we were to March 25. I think we would like to have some idea of, if the government don't step in, what actually ultimately is that deficit looking forward for perhaps the next 2 years, this year plus the following one, and the implications of the interest charge that then bears. And more importantly, in terms of this authority, the accumulated cash flow implications, because that is where it is really going to rub up against our viability. So it isn't just about the accumulated deficit, bad as that is. It is also to learn a little bit more about the impact in terms of cash flow on the authority, because we can only spend money once, and that really will have a big impact if it goes the wrong way for us. So that was a series of questions around SC&D. I have a further question on something unrelated to it in a moment, if I may, Chair.
Yeah, if we do take those ones first. Thank you, Councillor Beazley. Adam, are you happy to respond to those?
So, Chair, with regards to any reform of the SEND system, I have absolutely no evidence that it will not be blanket reform that will apply to the whole of the country on an equal basis. I have no evidence to suggest they will favour the north over the south or any kind of permutation thereof. You know, all the evidence at this moment in time points to their approach it on a blanket basis. You know, what that looks like, you know, we just haven't got that detail at this moment in time. You know, and through the leader's letter and my letter, we are clearly pushing them to disclose that and give us some indications and give us some reassurance. I keep telling them to reduce my anxiety level. You know, they haven't done that yet, but I keep pleading with them to do that as part of that process. With regards to the actual deficit itself, as I said, it's about £113 million at the 31st of March this year. If we add the budgeted amount, which was £57.5 million deficit, you're getting to about £170 million. And then you can probably at least add another £60 million. So you get up to about £230 million by the time we reach the 31st of March 2028, which is the end of the statutory override period. As part of that process.
We need to add another year to that.
Oh, okay.
There's another
year. Okay. One, two, yeah. Okay. Is there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. But nevertheless, with regards to the funding implications, we've adapted Figure 1 in the MTFP report that actually shows the debt interest on that accumulating SEND deficit. So we're budgeting for 25-26 for that to be about 7.7 million. So that's 7.7 million pounds of cuts and other changes to services that we've had to implement, which we would have been able to avoid if we hadn't, the Gen Fund hadn't had to underwrite and underpin the cash flow implications of that cash flow deficits. We're only proposing that that increases by an extra £0.5 million next year, and then it goes up by £4.5 million over the life of that medium-term financial plan. Now, you might say that doesn't seem proportional, you know, with regards to the deficit and its increase. The answer is it's not, because what you got to remember is we're temporarily borrowing, because that's what the government allowed us to do and suggested we should do in order to fund that. And the assumption is those interest rates will fall over that 4-year period, not just for the amount we're about to borrow, but also because we're only temporarily borrowing for that initial term for the whole amount. So hopefully that means that the interest on that debt over that period doesn't go out exponentially to the current amount that we're incurring. So there is a risk there if that interest rate forecast changes. If it doesn't follow that trajectory, then that's something that we're going to have to be very mindful of over that period. But I still, you know, would like the government, and the leader in her letter is exactly the same, the government to honour that pledge they made to resolve this position, return the system to financial sustainability in 2025.
Thank you. Graham indicated.
Thank you, Joe. Just to add to that, and I don't quite know how I've got to this position, but I'm going to paint Adam as the optimist and me as the pessimist, which does feel like a reversal of roles. I think those numbers will be larger than that. What we have seen year on year is a continued increase in demand and a continued increase in costs of each individual placement, and with more placements. I think those figures that Adam was quoting were effectively the current plan. I think year after year we have failed to achieve the current plan because of increased demand. My summary would be that would be closer to 400 million by March 28 than it will be to 300 million by March 28. So that's the sort of number that I think we're talking about. If the statutory override is continued, which it was indicated it will be, the challenge for us, as Mr. Richardson said, is the cost of the interest on the borrowing to fund that sort of thing. So unusually, I think I'd like to make Adam's picture slightly worse.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Burton would like to come in at this point. Councillor Beasley,
Are you
I
coming
will,
back to
I
me,
will
Chair,
come
after
back
that?
to
Thank
you, but people keep indicating that they want to respond, and I think it's to your questions, so that's why I'm letting them. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just thought I might be helpful here with the couple. I've got a few notes ready for a paper tomorrow, and it overlaps with some of the questions that's been asked here. I mean, first off, to make clear, the statutory override was designed to be a temporary fix for something which the government at the time never thought. They thought they could do it for a while. Yeah, if you look to when this all started, when EHCPs were first introduced in 2014, with the Children and Families Act, they never expected the numbers to go up like they have now. And I would assure you that, you know, I've looked into this nationally. It's happening all over the country, and I have some figures that I'll share tomorrow at Cabinet. I was at the LGA conference and listened to the minister's speech, and just to repeat some of the things that was said. So Catherine Mackenzie said that it was, she admitted that the system for young people with SEND is quite frankly on its knees, with too many children's needs not being met. She raised concerns about how many young people were waiting for the HCPs and how SEND has become one of your biggest financial pressures, providing these essential services become an overwhelming burden, is the words that she actually used. You know, this was in Liverpool, so I don't think she was talking to the north. Because it wasn't just people from the north there, so you know that is the words that she used, and we hopeful that the fix is on its way. However, the numbers are not showing signs of slowing. All the work that this local authority is doing and other local authorities are trying to change the system hasn't taken any. It hasn't taken the pressure off. In fact, quite the opposite. In fact, you dread to think how it would be if that work hadn't been done.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. I also should say at this point, since we've come on to the topic of the SEND and the DSG deficit, I did invite Councillor Carl Brown to come along, and I'm conscious that I haven't yet invited to come and talk. Councillor Beasley, did you want to come back on anything that you've heard at this point? And then if you want to address the things that have been said in relation to your initial questions, and then I'll ask Councillor Carl Brown to come and while we're on the topic of SEND, just to before we move on to anything
Chair,
else,
and then you'll come back to me with my other question.
and I will come back to your other question, but if that's on a different topic,
I
if I understand
did
you
want
right.
to say, just in response to Mr. Richins, and indeed to the Chief Executive, I'm unusually pessimistic, actually, in my views, based on what has happened to date and the exponential evidence that we have seen over the last 2, 3, 4 years in particular as to that level of cost. And I think the point I wanted to make in response was very much coming back again to the cash flow issue. I think that most members, and certainly most members of the public, don't recognise the dire consequences of the latter, that is, the cash flow implications. There is comfort in there around the override and the government's position over it, and surely Micawber-like something will turn up because somebody will have to do something, but it's the piece in between here and that occurring around cash flow. And I don't think that most people realise the extent of the implications of that for this authority in particular. And I just think we ought to try harder actually to get that message out so that everybody does understand, so they are clear that we can't hide under the comfort blanket of what the government have said, because we have a real and present problem over cash flow as well as a result. That's the point I really wanted to get back out again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Adam.
Chair, if I could just respond on that, you know, in the sense that if we look back to what we went through last year, we were the lone voice when it came to cash flow. The difference this year is we are no longer the lone voice. I've certainly had a recent conversation with the Society of County Treasurers, and there is an increasing number of county authorities that cash flow issue is looming large. I mean, it's something that they have also made representation to MHCLG about. So it was in some ways reassuring that we weren't just that lone voice anymore, although clearly not reassuring with regards to the actual issue itself.
Thank you. So at this point, Councillor Carr-Brown, would you like to come up and speak? You don't have to. Okay. It's up to you. I didn't want to not offer you the opportunity, as I mentioned about you coming along, simply because. Yeah, thank you.
That was all right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is something that we look at in practically every children's services scrutiny meeting. We obviously have a look at it from both sides, which is not only that we have a financial duty to the council and to our council taxpayers, but we obviously also have a duty to the children and families that we are dealing with, that are the recipients of the EHCPs. In terms of our oversight, we are aware of an enormous amount of work that has gone on within the children's services over the last couple of years. Not only have they improved on the care side of things, the children's services side of things, but also they have been working in tandem on the SEND side of things, stabilising workforce, increasing the amount of permanent staff over agency. That obviously saves money. There's an awful lot of strategies that have come through our committee in the last year or so, certainly since I've been chair, and an increasing focus on the sort of spend to save approach, which I think as a committee thoroughly support, putting in those long-term measures, that mainstream provision where appropriate, to increase capacity so that we can reduce some of the spend that we have, the enormous, outrageous spend that we have on out-of-area placements and private provision, things that really ought to be provided locally and by the state, as certainly as much as possible. Again, that will not be the case for absolutely everybody, but that will be the case for most people if we have the provision, the correct and adequate provision there. So in terms of what we do on our committee and how I think I can represent the voice of our committee, I think we are assured thus far, although we never take our eye off it, that the work is being done to try to deliver both a good service and a cost-efficient one to the best of everybody's ability within the envelope that we have and the need that is rising. I really dislike the word exponentially because it's usually misused, but to an extent that is really quite eye-watering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carr-Brown. I have people who've indicated, I think, to speak on this aspect, the DSG deficit, and I think those are Councillor Aikenhead and not Councillor Dowell. So I have one person who wishes to speak on this issue, which is Councillor Aikenhead. So I'm going to take her next.
Yes, I wanted to ask concerning the letter that's been sent to Angela Rayner. Has any attempt been made to get our local MPs to support that letter in any way?
I think Councillor Earl might come up to answer that, as it was her letter.
So just in response to that question, the SEND issue, along with wider local government finance, has been a standing item on every meeting that we've had with the local MPs. They are very, very aware of it, and at our most recent meeting, which was on Friday, we spoke about it at length, including the various updates that we've had. So, so they are very aware. I think it would be useful to maybe have a level of coordination around that approach, you know, see if we can get them to sign some additional letters and things like that. But I would like them to lobby in the best way that they can. on this issue. So I don't really want to step on their toes by demanding how they do that.
May I just ask a question as well, which is, I'm slightly assuming that the answer to this will be no, otherwise you'd have said, but have you had any response to the letters that were recently sent, either to Angela Rayner or to the Director of Finance at MHCLG? Has there been a response at this point?
At this moment in time, I've received a holding response from Nico Heslop, who's the Director of Finance at MHCLG, where he's asked a colleague to consider the letter and then respond to me, the Chief Exec, in due course.
I haven't had a response yet.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to just check. Thanks.
Did you have any questions from the centre you wanted to ask?
I can speak later on it, I think. We'll move on because people are waiting very patiently. So if I can come to Councillor Beasley and thank him for his patience in waiting for his last question.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Well, I'm glad we've had the debate that we have because I think it's important. The other item is relatively short and small, and it's an issue which I'm currently discussing with Mr. Richards and his colleagues. But what I wondered was, when I look at Appendix B, earmarked reserves to 31 March 25, which is on page 117, I just wondered whether and where any provisions against legal and related costs sit within that earmarked reserve table, or are they somewhere else? Am I looking in the right place?
I'm going to respond, but Matt's probably going to kick me when I respond to correct me as part of that process. Section 1, the information on page 117 in regards to earmarked reserves sets out just that, your earmarked reserves. Provisions are completely different. They're held elsewhere on the balance sheet. So they'll be, if you like, in the full balance sheet analysis that is provided to Audit and Governance Committee as part of the annual accounts, which we've already published them in line with the statutory deadline.
So, Chair, that will better inform us when you and I and your colleagues discuss the issue I've raised with you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And then can I come to Councillor Dower, who had a question or a comment?
Thank you, Chair. It's a relatively small comment based on page 101. And this is something I see Councillor Bartlett is online too. It's about the fact that one of the savings is around the potential closure of Red Hill Paddling Pool. And we've talked, Councillor Trent already raised the problem with the amount of people we've got who are who are deprived, got a deprived area in the neighbouring ward of Kinson, West Howe. And I just think, you know, if we're looking at SEND and how bad that is, and also EHCP and all the other things around children's services, and to me this is all linked. You know, we've got a paddling pool, which I'm driving past there, you know, 2 or 3 times a day, and at the moment it's absolutely jam-packed. If we didn't have that, it would be horrible. And I'm really sorry to see that that has been once again highlighted as an area of potential savings, and it just seems like an easy target, and I'm really sad about that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dower. Did anyone want to give a response on that item? Councillor Earl.
I'm looking at Adam and Matt, who may want to clarify where that savings appear within the MTFP, because it's not in the current year.
Chair, it's a very detailed point, in the sense that, if I understand correctly, we're looking at what is ES10, environment, service reductions, seek community management, transfer of paddling pools, and if not secured, close. You know, that was for 24-25, and then towards the right there is a comment. It may be that comment related to all the years of the MTFP, not just 24-25. I'm not quite sure, but in there it says 24-25 savings achieved, 25-26 at risk of for facilities to close, with the exception of the quants under tenancy at will with CTC, with ongoing work to complete community and asset transfers. No opportunities are currently identified for Redhull, which, if funding not reinstated, will require closure of the facility. I think that comment is probably looking more forward, and just referencing rather than in regards to the year in question. Well, because it was also related to 24-25, life might have moved on in regards to the 25-26 budget. So we just need to reevaluate and just remind ourselves, what did we do when we set the 25-26 budget? And I don't think, and I stand to be corrected, I don't think we put that saving in the 25-26 budget. So I think it was being flagged up in 24-25 as a potential. I think we resolved it when we set the 25-26 budget and took it off the table. But I might stand to be corrected because it's a relatively small amount in the £686 million budget. So, yeah, but it makes a huge
Appreciate that,
community
but
impact.
it's very,
Yeah, I agree.
it's a very
Yeah,
significant thing for
Yeah.
people in our wards.
Yeah.
I would just like to ask, if that is the case, can that paragraph be clarified to sort of come along with that, if that's all right, Chair?
I think we can clarify what what the position is, and as I say, I think it was in there for 24-25 as part of the MTFP for 24-25. But when we did the 25-26 refresh, took it off the table. I think that's my understanding, and the leader's nodding, so I'm sure that I've got that right.
Okay, thank you very much. Were there any other councillors who wanted to come in? Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got two questions. One which is a really a minor clarification, because I think the financial outturn paper has an error in it. It mentions, I think, 3 times that the budget for 24-25 used savings rather than reserves to balance the budget. But if I'm correct, that was the year, and Adam will correct me if I've got the figure wrong, that we used £25.2 million of the business rates as a one-off on the business rates reserve. So we did use reserves.
Adam, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I would, in the sense that clearly the years before budget, we used £30 million to fundamentally underpin the budget. And that's what, when we set the 24-25 budget, we had to address. The business rates was an in-year adjustment. It wasn't the use of reserve, because every year you get a review of your business rates. And in that year, when we undertake, as part of the financial strategy, when we set the budget for that, a fundamental review, we identified this additional resources that could be used to support the budget. And what the administration decided to do was not support just the 24-25 budget, but draw it down over a 4-year period to help with some of those one-off issues that were in the budget. For example, the Russell Coates Gallery and the externalisation, etc.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's nomenclature more than anything else. I mean, clearly there was business rates reserve used, and I just think it's really important in these documents that we are clear, because anybody reading that wouldn't have thought there was £25 million of one-off resource applied, and it was called the business rates reserve. But anyway, it's in the past, but it is. I just think it's an error in the document. The second question I have is regarding, it's a shame Councillor Cox isn't here today, but hopefully, Leader, you can give this a whirl. We've had a bit of a tit for tat, Councillor Cox and I, before, talking about future years savings programmes around where the primacy of those savings will come from, whether it should be previous delivery of savings, or whether it should be things like areas that are feeling the most hurt, or indeed areas where you're actually going to get the most risk and reward out of it as well. And I note in the MTFP paper that because of, and we've heard very eloquently from the chief finance officer, the concerns about future years' budgets and the redistribution of funding potentially up north. And I think really helpfully the council is as evidence in these papers, getting ahead of that and putting some savings plans in. And I think in the MTFP paper, which I'd fully support, there's some scenario planning for, I think, £13 million of savings next year, just in case those things come to pass. But then in the outturn paper for last year, one of the items that struck me was the section on seafront services, where that year there was an experienced reduction in visitor footfall, and as part of that there was spending freeze of repairs and maintenance, and further spending freeze of savings across the seafront. And I just wonder, and perhaps the leader can answer this, whether there is any thought that you are having as to just making sure that as part of these savings programs, we're essentially not cutting our nose off to spite our face. Because I think there's a very clear read-through. If we stop things like maintenance of our key tourist areas and seafront, and then see a reduction in footfall, which then sees a reduction in parking income, well, actually, we should then be correcting that and maybe improving those areas to try and see that footfall increase and that income increase as well. So I just wondered where you were on the cycle of savings in putting the risk of income generation as much as anything else into that matrix.
Thank you. Leader, do you want to respond?
I think it's really about the strategy in which we want to make some of these savings that are available to us, and by pushing our service areas to be able to deliver what we need to support the MTFP, we've actually found that we've been very, very successful in making that happen, and that's credit to the finance team who have done that. But I think in terms of the wider budget issues, and if we look at the seafront in particular, there haven't been any major savings along the seafront. In fact, we did the seafront strategy, which came through, that now becomes the mechanism for which we resource the seafront. And in our budgets, we have looked very carefully at every single line when it comes to our commercial operations and what the impact can be. I think there is still more work to do that, but I think the problem that I have as a cabinet member, which I really struggle with, is that we never look over a longer period. Like the MTFP is still quite a short-term period, and actually we're working year to year on getting that financial settlement from government, so we never quite know where we're going to stand the following year. And especially with the change of government, that's put us in a state of really struggling to financially plan in an appropriate way, because we don't know if we're going to lose money, we don't know if we're going to gain money. And it's also things like Councillor Trent mentioned earlier about the household support fund and the changes there. You know, we just don't know where we're going to sit. So I think the scenario planning is what's really important, but when it actually comes to it, the long-term planning is where the challenge is. And you know, the one good thing that I think this government has come out with when it comes to local government funding is that they're going to offer multi-year settlements, which allow for that longer term planning and making sure that we're not losing things in the short term to then lose, you know, commercial income, but over the long term. The problem is it's very difficult to plan, and I think our MTFP does the best job of doing that. And I think our budget our budget strategy is clearly working, considering the positive outcomes that we've had. Yeah, we're so dependent on that local government revenue settlement. That's where it really falls down in terms of being able to plan.
Yeah, thank you. And if I could come back, I completely agree with the leader on most of that. I think it's one of the perennial problems in local government when savings targets come every year, to just kind of look at today rather than look over the longer term. And one of the things that I think BCP and predecessor councils have probably been quite good at is things like invest to save. You know, that's something which we quite often get a longer horizon of looking, and I think we probably need to do maybe even more of that. And part of transformation program has been part of it, but there are other ways to do invest to save. But one of the things that, you know, hopefully some cross-party support on would be kind of invest to earn as well. And the kind of point I was making is income generation is a really, really big source of our revenue in this council. And, you know, we've all heard people lately complain about state of the roads and state of, you know, some of our key public areas. We hear it all the time. And that's something that we can do something about if we do focus on a slightly longer term horizon. And dare I say, I'm sure there's some number crunching that can go in there. And actually, if we are, you know, decently investing in some of our particularly more tourist facing public spaces, I think a strong case could be made that there would be extra income that would come in because of that. So maybe something when we do have time to devote some more time to, but it's something I think will get some serious cross-party support and crucially make our area better as well at the same time. But yeah, thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. And I note that we are having a report on commercial operations, which will come to our next board, so there will be more opportunity to talk about that in a lot more detail at the next meeting, which is, I think, been quite long awaited by the board. So it's welcome. Did anybody else have? Yep, Councillor Dedman, I see you indicating.
Yes, thank you. I hope I'm looking at the right thing. And my comment, not so much, well, it is a question. I am looking at this blue thing that my neighbour here has got, where the comment about Red Hill paddling pool was. And I've just noticed on IS, or is it 1S2? As Adam knows, I don't do spreadsheets and all that, but on that, harmonise street lighting turn-off to match Christchurch turn-off at midnight. Not main roads, key town and district centres, will initially turn off in Poole. I am amazed because, hang on, do you mean Christchurch is the only place where we turn our lights off? May look at the leader now because she's nodding. And if so, well, I'm horrified. Jokingly horrified, but good old Christchurch, I would like to say. We go home in the dark.
Leader, would you like to respond?
So that's a really good point, and I was very much involved. I remember talking about this as a cabinet when we were first looking at our MTFP and wondering what to do. And we actually have done quite a lot of work around this, including things like the energy consumption, what we can save from it. But you're right, the residents of Christchurch are really doing the right thing by not needing that. What I do think, though, is that there are other implications around there, particularly around safety and main routes and that kind of thing, which need to be considered in a wider sense. I would not be proposing, and just to confirm, that is not a proposal, that is currently sitting on the MTFP as potentially an option at some point in the future, not in year at all. But that saving in particular, I think it needs a little bit more consideration if we were to then implement on where we would do it and be strategic about it, as well as prioritising things like safety. And does it work in Christchurch, Councillor Dedman?
I was just going to say, Leader, that very often from full council meetings, we do literally drive home in the dark, which is not at all pleasant. However, somebody has just said here, oh, Christchurch people go to bed at 9 o'clock last night. Don't quote us.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, anybody else wanting to come in at this point? Councillor Trent.
Yeah, just really want to make a general point. I would have made it previously had I thought about it at the time, but the moving to the default position for collecting council tax to over 12 months instead of 10 months is a bit unfortunate. It's been 10 months for a long time, and actually, as someone from a household that was very hand to mouth a lot of the time, those last 2 months before the next year's council tax was actually a major opportunity to do a bit of catch up. So I actually think that it's a bit of a double-edged sword. People are used to paying it over 10 months, but they won't, I don't think, opt to pay it over a shorter period. But in household budgeting, it does actually help quite a bit. And we used it quite significantly in our household, particularly when things were at their tightest.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. I think, yes, Councillor, go ahead.
Just in relation to that comment, I think that it is going to be part of the, well, it is part of the consultation. So if you read the appendix, that's what they're asking about when it comes to the administration of council tax and making sure that it's paid on time. And you may be right, Councillor Trent. I mean, I've set up a direct debit to make sure that my council tax is collected every month. And of course, I do have to monitor that very, very carefully. But I'm not sure if people are used to it being every 10 months. I would actually say make sure you set up your direct debit and make sure that it's going out every month.
Yeah, just that it, in Poole at any rate, it seems to have been like that forever. And we built it into our household budget. So you pay the direct debit, and those extra 2 months is often the opportunity to deal with things that you haven't been able to afford to do the rest of the years. But, you know, it's just one of these changes that are being made, which I'm not necessarily think is brilliant.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Trent. So I wanted just to draw members' attention at this point to the specific recommendations that form the part of both of these reports, just in case anyone did wish to make any comment on those specifically. There are several. We are asked, or Cabinet will be being asked to note the financial outturn position, agree to set aside 0.5 million in an earmarked reserve to manage the potential risk associated with the residence card pilot scheme. Agree the residual surplus of 0.7 million is transferred to unearmarked reserves. Agree the capital environments between schemes funded by the Bus Services Improvement Plan. Note that the museum's capital scheme is forecast to exceed approved resources, and that, as Adam mentioned in his report, and as set out in Appendix C3. And then linked to that, recommend the Audit and Governance Committee recommend to Council to approve the revised funding strategy. So that will increase approved prudential borrowing of 1.3 million. And then that's the outturn. And then the MTFP report also has 3 recommendations around endorsing the latest position, acknowledging the ongoing process, and in respect to the SEND deficit, noting the update and acknowledging the action taken. So those are the specific recommendations. We have talked mainly on out of those, so far we have talked mainly about the SEND deficit, but did anyone have anything they wanted to raise on any of the specific recommendations other than that? No, I'm not seeing anyone indicating. I think it feels to me as though the main area that we might want to add anything specific to Cabinet, therefore, is around the SEND issue. And I noticed during the discussion, it was a point that I was going to raise, but I felt others had already raised it. There was some discussion about how we do, and I'm not saying this in a way that, I'm not meaning this to sound critical, but we seem to be seeing a pattern of consistently under forecasting what ends up being the expenditure on the on the SEND high needs. And so I did wonder if there was something we could say around wanting some assurance that all steps are being taken to address this, and so to make sure that our 26-27 budget, wherever possible, we can try to have a forecast that doesn't creep as it has done over the last couple of years. I appreciate the complexities and the difficulties involved in that. But there was something in there for me around in the discussion that we had. So that would be a proposal I'd put forward, that we might want to pass on those thoughts out of this discussion, to pass those thoughts on to Cabinet. I see Adam indicating, then come to you, Councillor Boyd.
Chair, my only reference was to be, if you looked at Cabinet agenda tomorrow, there is a separate paper on the SEND budget forecast for 25-26. So, clearly, that's not on the paper that's in front of you tonight, but it's a recommendation that could be equally applied to that report as to this report.
Yes, and I have seen that report as well, and I have noted that there are some comments in relation to that area within that report. I wondered, given that it feels to me as though our interest as a board here has been in that aspect largely tonight, whether we might want to reflect that to Cabinet tomorrow, and offer some thoughts along the lines that I've just probably not completely articulately put forward. Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Chair. I completely understand where you're coming from. My view on this, for what it's worth, is to, I suppose, to cut the finance team a little bit of slack. That this high needs situation is something that has been brewing, not just in this council for many years, but across the whole of the local government landscape. And it's clearly not a fine art. So I think what we heard earlier on in the discussion, or the difference of opinion, if you like, between the chief exec and the chief finance officer, was more about where it might end up and scale, and it's probably opinion. So I for one wouldn't be too critical of. I would actually be uncomfortable with being too critical of the finance team for kind of underestimating the scale and the rise of the deficit, because there's just so many unknowns in it. So personally, I don't feel that we need a formal recommendation, because to me it would feel like overview and scrutiny is chastising them and saying, actually, we don't think you've done a good enough job. I think we can recognise a flavour of the discussion in that we need to keep a very close eye on it, including that forward projection. And I think we've heard that loud and clear anyway. So I fully agree with what you're saying. I just wouldn't agree with it being a formal recommendation.
No, that's absolutely fine, and I don't particularly need it to be. But if the board are broadly happy with me relaying the flavour of the discussion tomorrow and putting forward those thoughts to cabinet, then I can do that. Councillor Waite.
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of think that if we were to account for the most negative scenario of send demand, how on earth do you get a balanced budget through? And then all the nice to haves have to go. You've got to have a little bit of a fudge, I suppose, to get a budget through. And if we want the things that we want in it, and then you kind of deal with the consequences afterwards and hope that the send issue gets resolved, which the government have said that it will. But I think it's worth probably giving ourselves the wiggle room to play with to preserve other services in the meantime.
Okay. Okay. Can I try it again? No, I'm echoing.
What now has to be?
Okay, I think we've sorted it. All right. So I therefore think that I'm not hearing anybody putting forward any additional recommendations or any challenge to the recommendations in these reports. I feel everyone's content with what I suggested, which is that I give a verbal response around the discussion, particularly on the send side of things. I think at this point, therefore, I can just say thank you, everybody. Thank you very much to Adam. Thank you very much to Councillor Earl and to everybody else, the other officers, and to Councillor Carl-Brown, Councillor Burton for coming to talk to us. I think we've had a very good discussion and there's been a lot of important points raised. Would just like to take the vote on approving or on supporting the recommendations in these two reports, if I may take them all in one go, because I don't see any reason not to. Councillor Broadhead is indicating a different view.
Sorry, it's everybody. We all do scrutiny differently, but I kind of strongly feel that the job of scrutiny is to scrutinise the reports. These are cabinet's papers, not our papers, and to raise anything that we want and recommendations that we might want to direct to cabinet, or if we're really against something. But I'm a bit uncomfortable with us having a vote on every single cabinet recommendation, because we're here to look at the detail, not to necessarily approve all the papers.
Okay, that's fine. If we want to just note, if we want to just note the contents and leave it at that, we can do. Councillor Aikenhead has a different view.
Okay, there is certainly some things in here that are too important for us to just note them. I feel that some really good work has been done. Some good work's been done by the Children's Overview and Scrutiny. Some good work has been done by the officers and by the leader of the council in lobbying the government on this. And I feel that just noting it is not enough. I completely agree with Councillor Broadhead that we shouldn't have, of course, just go around agreeing with everything, but I do feel that we've got to do or just agreeing with the recommendations just because we can. But I do think in this case noting it's not enough, and that I think that we should be endorsing what the what is being suggested here, but particularly on the issue of send, I think we should be endorsing the actions that are being taken. If we're more comfortable with something that isn't just taking the recommendations, then I will move that we endorse what the officers, leader of the council and children's overview and scrutiny have been doing on this issue.
So just to clarify that, I think that would be recommendation C on the MTFP report in respect to the send deficit note and update. The update and acknowledges the actions taken.
Note the rest.
And so you'd like to vote to support that recommendation?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'd like us to
You'd like
something
us to-
much stronger than
you'd
just noting it.
So should we do that? So if I could see a show of hands in support of specifically recommendation C to the MTFP report, please. All those in favour?
Looks to be unanimous.
Yeah. Okay, that's lovely. And then if the board is content, then we'll take Councillor Broadhead's point and simply note the content of the rest and not express a view by means of a vote. Does that satisfy everybody? Okay. In that case, I think we've reached the end of the agenda, and thank you all very much for your time this evening. And I'll close the meeting.